Okay, everybody, welcome. This is fortunately our second session with Aurelien Laherte, and Frank has put this together for all of us who are fans of the wines. And I am recording the session, and I will be posting it on the forum later for those who were not able to join us. And I will be staying in communication with everybody through chat, turn my camera off. And so if you guys have questions that are not yet addressed, try to run them through me and I'll try to get them to Frank in case he's not watching so closely. And I can see Brian's already got his Laherte out too. Some of us on the West Coast, it's 9:30 in the morning. Frank's obviously one of them. Starting early, baby. Whew, Brian too. Yep.
Yeah.
Aspen probably is as well. I'm not. I'm doing coffee. So, all right, Frank, I turn it over to you, buddy.
Thank you, Todd. And even in your somewhat unhealthy condition, you're still here helping us. So
Of
shows your
course.
commitment and your care for the community here and for this topic and for honoring Aurelian for making time on Saturday night. And it is Saturday night, although it's 9:30 here in LA. It's somewhere different where you are. And where Aurelian is, it's 16:30, which is, or 18:30, which is 6:30, right?
Yeah, it's time for apero. Yeah,
Okay.
so we are
Okay.
on place. All good.
All right. I welcome you back. We
Yeah.
last spoke to you in March of 2022, and that was the first time we met you. You were in a different office that day, not this nice tasting room that you've since completed following our last discussion together. How are you liking that tasting room back there?
I think, in fact, this is not just the tasting room that did some big changement. It's also a lot of things happened during the last 3 years at the domain. So this is why it was a good timing to have this conversation and to explain which kind of changement we did and why we are doing also this changement. So for me, the tasting room it's the last things that was not the most important, but for sure it's I think you have to take some importance to have some good condition to receive the people. But for me, on the beginning, the most important is the wine production. Also, a lot of things we will talk about the changement in vine growing and also what's happened with the winery extension.
Beautiful.
So a lot of things happened for sure during the last 3 years.
Yeah, and we'll cover some of those things. We might cover some briefly, a little bit. Some of the others will go into more detail with an eye to the time and being respectful of that. Um, just to fly over this or give a high level view of what people can expect over the next 60 to 90 minutes, we will talk about a couple things with intention, which is first your range, the wines, why they are what they are. We will have some contrast discussion. Let me see if this can show. So let me get this closer or further. There's the Chardonnays. So we'll have discussion about the Chardonnay, for example, and why you do one versus the other, and how those are grown differently, perhaps. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about changes to the winery. We'll look at the new facility and your some of your shift into the different new concrete tanks. We'll talk about how Petit Melier is beginning to play a larger role in what Laherte Frères does and what it believes into the future in
Yeah.
terms of how climate impact is informing that decision to use that cepage along with some of the others that you've been known for. And then we'll do some question and answer. Some of you have submitted questions in advance. I've attempted to build those into the agenda. And then there was a few questions posted this week. We'll see if we can get to those. And overall, we're going to have a great discussion. And I will continue to drink my Le Rouge Maison, which is the Pinot Noir cuvée,
Yeah.
and enjoy that throughout the presentation. So, Aurelien, welcome. Let me just give a few opening remarks about what I know about you. And some of this is from our discussion from 2022. A few of you were on that, including I see David here. So, David, this is going to be some refresher for you as well. Seven generations, not uncommon. I think when we talked to Thomas Champ last month, he is generation number five. And so we continue to pass this great heritage down in different domains and see the winery continue. Established in 1889 by two of your two brothers in the family,
Mhm.
and they were originally an Epernay negociant, And in the year of 1930, thereabout, part of the family moved to Chavaux, where you are today, which is about 15 minutes from downtown Epernay. Yeah, 15, 20?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Okay. The winery, if the numbers aren't right, Aurelien, you'll tell me, approximately 12 hectares and some other parcels that you might farm in some different places that you have an agreement with to bring the fruit back, but to take care of the land. Um, the fruit comes from around 12 different villages, including your home village of Chavaux, and most of it comes from the Coteau Sud d'Epernay, which is kind of where you are. I'm going to show that now, just so I can give a map to everybody to give them a sense of where we are here. It may be a little small, a little clumsy, so forgive me, but if you can see that,
Go
Aurelien
full
is,
screen on it, Frank, real quick. Hit the green on the
I
upper left.
see.
Nope, not that
Okay,
one. Yeah, there you go.
there we go. Aurelien is here today. This is Chavaux underneath this pin. Here's Epernay, a big circle. You can see a lot of development here. So you just slide south down this way to get to Chavaux. And then if you wanted to go to Blanc de Blanc, and there is some property there from your grandmother, I think, Aurelien, correct, in Vertu and Voipreux?
But mostly on the bottom. This is after Ménil-sur-Oger.
Yep,
Then after,
out of view.
you will have the map from the domain like that with the picture. We could have a larger view of where we have the vines exactly. But in
Okay,
fact, yes, Coteau Sud d'Épernay, it's really from the south of the city of Épernay, and it's you see a bit Épernay on your right. It's right Marne. So this is where the Marne River is going through. And after, so upstairs on your left, that will be the Marne Valley will start. So it's really Coteau Sud d'Épernay. It's really a sandwich. It's a really big mix between Marne Valley and Côte des Blancs.
got it. Let me show one other quick photograph here. Close out of this one. Take me a second here. The wine that I'm drinking today, since it's all about me, it is from this plot, which is the Pinot Noir. The village is here, so it's around the trees and just down this small road, and this is where my bottle is coming from today.
Mhm.
Now, really, if you want me to bring up the map, maybe now is a good time to do that. Let me find the map. Here it is. And I'll make this bigger. I don't think I can scroll this, Todd. Let me go back out. I'm having trouble with my map. Why am I having troubles?
Well, there you see the at the top center. You've got
Yeah,
yeah,
this
there
is,
you
I
go.
got it.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. So I'm
So
going to
the,
bring this in.
all the small red points, this is the different plots that we have. So you could see that there is a lot of small plots, a little bit everywhere into the different terroirs. Today, it's more than 80 different plots that we have. And as you said, this is across 12 different villages. So of course, the most important, it's coming from the Coteau Sud d'Épernay. But after, so this kind of village, Moussy, Bruny, Mancy, Chavaux, and Épernay as well. And then we have also some plots in the Marne Valley, Coteau Sud, Côte des Blancs, and then also more recently in Montagne de Reims. In Boursault, this is two plots that we have. So this is really the historical place of, I think, the Marne Valley. And that's something we will talk later because now that's some Pinot Meunier that we replace. Now that's Petit Mélier plantation.
Okay, let's go down to your grandmother's property way down at the bottom here.
Voilà. And the end of the Côte des Blancs, so just down Le Ménil, you have Vertu, that's a village I think that you are familiar with, and Voipreux, this is a small village which is more on the flat soil, and this is where we make Nature de Crais. Yes, exactly, Frank. This kind of wines as well. Yeah.
Yeah, this is my favorite Chardonnay from your production because it's the no sulfur, no dosage, and it's really just bright, clean, fresh, and kind of almost taste the land coming right through your glass.
Yeah.
Anything else you want me to show on the map here, Aurelien, or should we
Then,
go?
if you go upstairs on the right, you have Bouzy, which is the village from my wife. Of course, we are getting married by love, but sometimes it's some vines arriving from the family. Go maybe a little on the right.
Yeah, I gotta scroll. Hold on.
Yeah, sorry. And so this is the famous part from the Montagne de Reims. You have Bouzy, Ambonnet, so these two Grand Cru. And here it will be a new Lieu-dit vintage wines will arrive for end of the year or beginning of 26.
And is that going to be Pinot Noir, I assume?
This is two plots of Pinot Noir from all vines, yes. So
Okay.
one plot's on the bottom near Ambonnet, and the other one it's upstairs a little bit more near Louvois. So it's a very two different terroir, in fact, but giving a good blend, a good balance for the terroir of Bouzy. So we are super interested and passionate with making new cuvée. But here it's also the spirit and a little bit of the love also from my wife's part.
I see. They are quite far apart, aren't they?
Yeah, but Bouzy, it's a big village.
And have you named the cuvée yet?
It will be Bouzy Blanc de Noir.
Bouzy Blanc de Noir. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So pulling back out now that we've seen everything, so we have the circle up here. We didn't have the Montagne up here, but have you stopped getting that fruit now from Sermier?
But that's in fact the vines that we have in property that we are working with, and sometimes we have also the possibility to buying some grapes. So the cuvée Les Longuevoies, which was from Sermier, Premier Cru, so the upstairs a bit the Montagne de Reims. So, but
Yeah.
that's something. The last edition was done in 19 vintage.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got everything then. So most of it's here around the village, and you've got some dots out here where you've got some land where you're doing some interesting things, Bouzy, Vertou, and then up in the Marne, and then a little bit of Montagne, perhaps.
Yeah, exact.
Okay.
So
Let's go with this.
This is quite important in terms of diversity. It's not a competition, but this is not really often that a family domain have some vines in Coteau Sud d'Épernay, in Marne-Vallée, in Montagne de Reims. That's also for us, it's a kind of security that every year we will probably have some problems with the frost or the hail or a storm, but never everywhere. So that's a guarantee also to have the good yield. And I think also in terms of diversity, this is why today we are doing between 12 to 15 different wines. It's because we have this possibility from the diversity of the different terroirs. For sure, if we will be only have some Pinot Noir, for example, just from the village of Bouzy, I don't think we will have the possibility of creativity to make 15 different wines. Here, with the Pinot Noir from Bouzy, with the Pinot Noir that you are tasting now, Frank, Les Rouges Maisons, that's really two different idea, different potential of terroir and aromatic expression of the Pinot. So that's really what we like. And I think today, what we try is that the diversity from, in fact, in the vines, we try to get the same in the winery. So in the winery, we are working mostly with the barrels, then with the foudre, the tronconic tanks. We have a bit of the stainless steel, and the recent addition was the concrete tanks. That's super important for us. We will talk more in details about this, why we are doing that, for the which kind of vision that we have. I think it's a super important for us.
And that really came through when we were talking 3 years ago when Todd and I first met you. That I remember the discussion. You were very clear that you first wanted to learn the identity of all of these plots, which is a tremendous amount of effort because if you have 80 different parcels and you have a different climate for a particular year, things can start to really become complex and very diverse. But it took you effort since you arrived at the winery in 2004, 2005 to start learning those differences and then determining, how you would, compose things and put them together. Or such as in Le Grand Crier, when you started making it in 2014, you decided when you and your father thought, hey, this particular Chardonnay plot is really unique. Let's put it on its own.
Yeah. Always long-term reflection in terms of vine growing, but also in terms of vinification, winemaking, and creativity of the new wines. My parents was doing mostly Brut, Blanc de Blanc, Rosé, Millésime. And today, you see that the extension of the range, it's was doing step by step, years after years. Not just the idea to make unique, limited wines, not just the idea that, okay, these plots have a nice name, so we will put something good in terms of marketing. It's really that, as you say, if we are able to vinify each plot separately to understand the potential of the terroir or not. Yeah, I mean, there is some plots that I think I know that these vines will be interesting, but always in a blend, not alone. They are not enough complex just alone. So you have to be very pragmatic also in your approach. But for sure, sometimes also with the vine growing improvement that we did for the last 20 years, there was some plots that maybe give us a lot of good surprise. And that's for me what we say, oh, I didn't expect that. For sure, Les Grandes Crayères, this is some plots that we have in the family since 3 generations now. And I think until 2014, the first edition of Les Grandes Crayères, this juice was going into the Blanc de Blanc because it's a good Chardonnay from Côte au Sud d'Épernay. So that's really represents the identity of this Blanc de Blanc. But we were always amazed by the quality and the transparency of the terroir with these plots. So this is why we took the decision to say, okay, now we really feel we have the guarantee that this kind of wines could be well integrated in terms of complexity, transparency from the chalk, and working every year. Because for us, always as a vintage, it's done every year.
So maybe this is a good point to pause and let me bring back these three wines because I know there was a question that came through the community and they wanted to understand. So you grow Chardonnay and you maybe have it growing in different places around the village and around the Côte Sud d'Épernay. So if you're going to think about doing three different Chardonnays, say here's two.
Yeah.
Why make them different? These are both no dosage. Why is this one done separately and this one composition, and then this one a single site or Ludit? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, in fact, the Blanc de Blanc Brut Nature, that was the wine that we did. There was just this Chardonnay in the range. The plots for Côte des Blancs from Nature de Crais was already going into the blend of, yes, that was a creation. It was in 2018, the first harvest. So why we didn't put these plots separately? Because before we were thinking that it was not enough potential and quality to be 100% from these plots. So we have to make some changements in the vines, changements in terms of winemaking, and we arrive with the idea of for Nature de Crais to maybe that these plots could be used in with a different way of vinification, with the idea of no sulfite. It's not by ideology, it's not by ethic. It's really because I think that's more interesting to look what are the experience with this kind of vinification. And there is some plots who are working better than others. And we follow that the impression of the terroir, the Premier Cru from Vertu and Wapre, with this kind of vinification was a good match. So this is why, but we did some experience in 2015, 16, 17, and then in 18, we say, okay, now it's good, we could make it. And since now 2018, we are doing this cuvée.
So prior to 2018, this bottle didn't exist because the fruit for this bottle was ending up in here. Is that right?
Completely agree. And it was the same for Les Crayères. Les Crayères was arriving in 2014, the first edition. For us, it was also to have the presentation, not by provocation, but to explain that there is some good Chardonnay, of course, in the Côte des Blancs, like in Avis, in Ménil-sur-Roger, like the Grand Cru. But here in Chavaux, Les Grandes Crayères, when you look, it's just a piece of chalk. You have just 20 centimeters of topsoil, and after the roots are completely in the chalk. And here, when you have that, you have really the potential that it's a real qualitative terroir, and the Chardonnay are quite very pure and elegant and complex. So this is why we decide to say, okay, Côte au Sud d'Épernay, it's a bit of cliché, but In our village, you could taste les Rouges Maisons, what you have in your glass, Frank, today, which is the Pinot Noir on the clay soil. Then we could taste les Vignes d'Autrefois, which is all vines of Pinot Meunier with soft soil and after in the chalk. And also you could taste the Chardonnay. So in one village, you have, regarding the different terroirs, an expression of what is the Côte Sud d'Épernay. So this is why it's quite difficult to understand and to explain our terroir, because you have a lot of complexity, a lot of possibility of matching, of blend between variety. You could have some Chardonnay on the clay or Chardonnay on the chalk. You could have the Pinot Meunier on the chalk or the sand or the limestone. So with this combination, you will create, in fact, not you as a winemaker, but you as a wine grower, you will create really different personality.
So let me just ask you one variation of the question, and then we can maybe take on the next topic. If you vinified this, since it's only 20 centimeters to chalk for the roots on this, and we know this is coming from chalk, yeah?
This is a chalky soil, but it's more a flat terroir. More sediment, etc. So I think the cœur de terroir, this is not necessarily from Nature de Crais. The really cœur de terroir, it's les Grandes Crayères. This is for me where you have the biggest expression of terroir. So this is why we are vinified in this way. Exactly. Nature de Crais, it's an interesting premier cru terroir, but in terms of minerality and details, maybe this is not the most, I will not say the most interesting, but maybe you need, for my part, I find some more interesting to look for something different in terms of richness, vinosity, etc., which reveals a little bit more of vertu.
So then one more variation, because we had a question come in about dosage and dosaging decisions. And I know that when we talked in 2022, we had some discussion about this, and you thought 0 to 5 was kind of your spot where you wanted to land your wines.
Mm-hmm.
I think this one is around 2.5, yeah?
Yeah.
So before you put this, before you disgorge this and put it to cork, do you trial that at different levels of dosage to see what is going to be the best for Le Grand Cru that vintage? Because it might be different than the one that preceded it.
The dosage, I will never be the grower who will say to you, okay, the true is 2.5 for all the life of the wine. The good thing is that the wine is alive and that you have a natural evolution, but that according to the vintage, this as a wine tester, you know it very well. There is some vintages who have a very low cycle of maturity, and there is some other vintages who have an evolution very, very fast. So for us, for me, the true in terms of dosage between 0 to 4. I think we are quite in the true. When we do the dosage try, of course, 0 is always showing well, because without dosage, you have the impact of the works that you did in the vines, in the winery, you have the terroir, so that's great. But les Crayères, I think it's also the wine that it's a bit like les Rouges Maisons, les Vignes d'Autrefois, that's a bit gastronomic. It's also like a bit of sweetness, bring you a little bit more complexity, richness. It bring you as well the potential of aging in the cellar for the next years, etc. So why 2.5 more than 1.5? This is a good question. I mean, this is the try that we did. We invite some friends and sommelier, etc. There was the bottles on the table blind. And I mean, the empty bottles, this is the good dosage. This is, but it's true at this time. In 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years, maybe it will be better with 3.5 grams or with 1. This is always the difficulty for me. But today, I'm not the guy who are thinking too much about it. It's a little bit of as a spice that you have to use a bit as a dosage, but not as a scientist. This is mostly to use as a feeling that, okay, this Chardonnay could be a little bit richer, and the sugar, the dosage is the nutritive part for the potential of aging of the wines. You know what I mean? Huh? And for me, in this idea, of course, maybe not. I have some friends like Champagne Tarlan, they do everything brut nature because they believe that the wines could age better, etc. You have some other growers who have a higher dosage and even more the big brands. when you taste the old vintage of big brands from the years 90, for example, you never feel the 10, 15 grams of sugar. And when you taste some old vintages also of Brut Nature, you don't feel that it's too acidic. So there is no just one truth. You have different directions. I will not say that the best direction is in the middle, but for me, a little bit of dosage is giving a more possibility of having more complexity. That's the thing.
So if we think about this wine, which we know that your intention year after year is to make it without any dosage. So implicit in that would be no dosage trials, yeah?
No, because here the difference is that you have the reserve wines. Compare the reserve wines, it's also one of the key. Because when you are working with one vintage as Les Grandes Crayères 16, for example, you have to do with the potential of the vintage. For the Blanc Nature, for Ultradition, I mean, for all the non-vintage wines, we are super lucky is that in Champagne, we have the possibility to work with, to play with the different vintages as a reserve. And I think it's a good transition that in my idea, because you feel that with over the years, now it's almost 20 years that I'm working in the winery, and I feel that there is a lot of variation years after years, harvest after harvest. You have a lot of extreme conditions sometimes in terms of maturity, and the years after, it's like you take 22 was really rich in tons. You have a lot of maturity, probably maybe a little too much. That's really the impact of the climate change in terms of more maturity. And then you take 23, which was a lot of rain, a lot of difficult condition, and it was some problems of maturity before the harvest. So it's completely the opposite. But if you arrive to keep a lot of good 22 in a fresh way, it will help a lot the 23 into the blend. And it was the same with 23 and 24. So for me today, it's really important that a reserve, maybe it's a reserve for quantity, but this kind of reserve, it's super important for the quality. And in my idea, I would like even more to continue to increase the level of the wines that we have in reserve. So that's super important. And this is after when you have that, it means that this is like you in your private cellar. If you say, okay, I think that this wine could age well for the next 30 years, you need to find some place and you need to find some good condition. So for us, the idea was to find better place to age for in a better condition, this kind of reserve. So this is why we did the concrete winery extension in order to have this possibility to vinify this different harvests separately. And after, when we feel that it's the good time to use it, we just could take a bit and use it into the blend.
So maybe now is a good time to talk about the winery changes in the concrete tanks, but I just want to close this topic with one more thing.
Yeah.
So this is going to have a base with reserves, because this is one of the examples that you just got done talking about, is that you're putting reserve behind this, yeah?
Here there is no reserve because the vinification. No reserve, because here it's the other thing is that now we are vinify all these wines without sulfite. And without sulfite, it means that it's a little bit more, I will not say risky, but it's this kind of wines are a little bit more fragile when it's the vinification period. After, when it's in bottles, you have the second fermentation in bottles. And for me, this kind of wine is completely safe because, again, the best preservative to protect the wine, this is the sulfite, but also the most important, this is the CO2. And here, as the wine is sparkling, this is good. So this is why here, Nature de Crais, it's only one harvest. But I don't want to declare as a vintage because the intention is more to put in advance the Chardonnay profile and the Côte des Blancs profile than the vintage. The idea is that you have to, in fact, maybe to resume that a range, we try to build it regarding expression of terroir, expression of vintages, or expression of variety. And after that, if we don't find the way, there is still the possibility of the blend. What we do for Ultradition, for example, what we do for Empreinte, which is a blend of, Empreinte is there,
The Pinot Chard.
which is a blend of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but in one vintage. Our limit of works, it's our creativity. We could continue to make even more wines, but after, again, you have to be quite, I would not say smart, but quite pragmatic with the approach.
So you could assign a vintage to this, but you choose not to because it's only one vintage.
Yes. And for me, I don't want that you say, okay, Nature de Crais on the 22 is better than 23, because for me, this is the Chardonnay, the vinification without sulfite, and the terroir, which is more important in this wine, in fact, than the vintage. But les Grandes Crayères, of course, you will have some very big difference with 16 and 22, for example, which are completely opposite style.
And probably 18 if you put that in there also, yeah?
Yeah, exact.
Okay. Okay. I think we've covered the dosage topic, and if there's any questions or follow-on comments about that, maybe you could put it in the chat and we can grab it at the end. Should we look at the changes to the winery and do some of the short movie clips that you've given me?
Yes.
Okay. Give me one moment to make that happen. So I'm going to go back to my share and I'll ask the audience's patience for a moment while I pull this up. And what would you like to look at first, Aurelien?
From press to barrels, if you could.
Okay. So let me get this ready.
So we have the two traditional presses that we are working with. And downstairs, this is the reception of the juices. We are the coca, what the press we are using are super qualitative. And here, this is like the separation of the different type of juices. So but I think first here, it's the free run part. This is like the first juice, which is not the most qualitative that go in distillery. Then here, that will be the cuvée. This is the best part of the juice. And this part in the middle is the taille. This is the end of the press. That's what we could use for the Rosé de Meunier, for Ultradition, etc. So after, we will choose where to vinify this. Then we continue by gravity, and we arrive in these tanks. These tanks are for the sedimentation, and after continue by gravity again to have this. This is the place that we vinify today 70% of the wines. You see that it's mostly Burgundy barrels. You have a bit of the food. The food, this is for the biggest plots. It's 50 hectoliters. And then you have some tronconic tanks as well. And I think, so here, all what you see, this is reserve wines. Because the bottling for us was done three weeks ago. This kind of reserve, there is some 24, of course, but you have some 23, 22. You have also the perpetual reserve for that we are using for les set, which is somewhere here. Exactly, there.
Yeah, there it is right here.
Exactly. And so I think all of these wines are in a very good place because they are aged with the oxido reduction process from the barrels.
Interesting. This is the Solera here, huh?
Yes, exact. Yeah.
05 to 23, because 05 was the first year that you began to harvest it when you and your dad planted that section of co-planted all 7 varietals.
Exactly. Yeah. And the 24 harvest, it's somewhere else in this winery. And after we will blend them as using for the perpetual reserve.
As a side note, if those of you on the call on the session, if you haven't had Lisette, just for the purposes of expanding your wine knowledge and just the appreciation for what's been done here.
Yes.
That plot is farmed by horse. It's very small. It's all 7 co-planted, all 7 co-fermented from a start in 2005 all the way now through what, 2024?
What you did? Sorry.
You have a base wine plus reserves all the way back to 2005.
Yeah, exact. Yes. And we always refresh at 50%.
50%.
So, yeah, exact.
Okay.
So in fact, here what you see, this is mostly 300 barrels plus the food plus the tronconic tanks. So it means that here this is the reserve, but for harvest 25, I hope we will have some good grapes. So of course we will need these barrels empty and clean to have the new juices arriving for fermentation and vinification. So that means that these reserve wines will do a racking over before the harvest around August. And then we have to put this kind of wines in a, I think, really nice place. Before we were working, you could have a look of the old concrete tanks. So that's the winery that my grandparents created. So here, this is concrete tanks. So you see that it was the concrete tanks built on place. This is tanks between 20 to 80 hectoliters of wines. Here, what we are doing, for example, the aging of reserve wines, but we could do also use that for the blend, also to make the fermentation and vinification of some Pinot Meunier or the Thai of Chardonnay, for example. What we like with the concrete is that you have a very good magnetism, a good contact with the ground. Then you have a bit of the porosity, so it's not completely reductive profile regarding the inox, the stainless steel. And also, you don't have a lot of inside, so you'll see the painting, the epoxy painting. And inside, the walls are quite deep. And it means that you don't have a lot of variation of temperature. That's super important if you would like to respect the freshness of the fruit. So these tanks were built in the years 80, and I think they are super important and qualitative. And behind, we have also, you see here, it's what we call the tronconic tanks, like a tree, in fact. So on the bottom, it means that you have larger contact with the leaves. And this is compared to the food or to the barrels. So that's another, again, I told you about the diversity that we want to have in the winery. This is the good example.
So these are this is the winery conditions that your father and the family was making just the 4 wines that we talked about before you arrived?
For the tronconic tanks?
Because before you arrived, the family was just producing 4 different cuvées, correct?
Yes, exactly. Yes, and my father was working a bit with the barrels, but maybe in the year 2000 they had 20, 30 barrels. So this kind of tronconic tanks, that was my choice. It was arriving in 2018. And so just behind where we are arriving now, this is the new winery extension. So you see that it's concrete as well, but it was built in Italy and arriving by the roof and put there in this place. So this is, I think, for us, one of the biggest projects that, for my part, in fact, one of the biggest projects of my life. Here, it's a very important quantity of wines that we could put there, and in a very good quality preservation. The concrete, here there will be never fermentation and vinification. This is just for the reserve, just for the aging, for the reason that I told you about the benefit of the concrete. And here you have to imagine that it was the house of my old grandparents. It was one of the house, the oldest from the village, more than 130 years. And when I had first this idea that, okay, we have to move out the formal house and to replace with tanks, it was a very, I have to say, very strange idea. My father was saying, okay, I don't understand exactly, but it was taking a few years. And then in 22, we were completely convinced that it was the good things to do. And so everything was in place. And we started after harvest 23, sorry, to finish last July for the harvest 24. Yeah.
So as we talked this morning, what are in these new concrete tanks? Anything?
But now you have there is no wines. The wines are now in barrels as a reserve, and after, in fact, here you will have the reserve wines from August to next April.
Okay, so the reserves that you'll be adding to the barrels start here before they move to the barrel room.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And back in the barrel room, just a question came to my mind. A lot of it looked like it was older barrel. Is that the strategy to use older wood, or is there new wood added every year?
You could have a look of the one of the movie if you could close it. Yes, about put a new concrete tanks part two.
Okay.
This one. So the idea that the top the the top of the tanks we could use as a platform. So when you go, because these tanks are working are sorry 4 meters high, so quite it's a quite tall place. And on the top here you have some new toys that we are really happy with. It's the tronconics and the food. So this is quite new. So this is a new oak, but here this is will stay in place for the next 25 years. This is here fermentation vinification. So these six different tronconic tanks and food have the capacity of 23 hectoliters. It means that when we have one cuvée, when we have one cuvée, it's 21 hectoliters. So it means that we just could put it here. You have enough space that the fermentation is going well, and I think it's a very good it's good volume for us.
So your new tanks are down here, and then on top of them you have the new wood.
Exact. Yeah.
Okay. So for the 228 liter small stuff, it's all just old wood, yeah?
Yeah, so the idea that for us, the wines from the domain, I don't want to get too much influence from the new oak. That's not something I feel especially happy and friendly with, because I think the terroir impacts and the variety and the typicity of the vintage have always more importance than the typicity of the vinification. This is really my feeling. So usually we are taking barrels from friends in Burgundy, from 3 to 5 years old. I think this is the good time. I think they are not too oaky by style, and then we could use it when they will have 25, 30 years old.
Okay. Okay. So there is wood, but the wood is mostly older, except maybe that you put the initial press of the cuvee in those higher new truncated barrels above the roof there.
Yeah, and
Okay.
uh, uh, and the idea of the barrel, it's a small volume to have a very good alcoholic fermentation. Then it's also the idea of the oxido reduction process. I think it's more important. Why we are doing vinification in wood is not to get some oaky vanilla flavors. This is really from the oxygen working through the going through the oak, and the wines inside know how not to fight, but how to react with the oxygen. You know also how to be protected with the lees on the bottom, and you have a natural balance. The wine is quite vaccinated for the future. You know, and this kind of also small volumes, I think, permit to us to vinify each plot separately than just having very big tanks. In the big tanks, first the fermentation is not so, it's too active, and second, I think if you have a small plots, you never the volume is not really well thinking.
Okay. So I think I
Understand?
understand. If there are other questions about the changes to the winery, the vinification process, the use or lower use of wood, please put that in the chat and Todd will collect it.
Yeah, just make sure we save some time at the end. Actually, Brian Grafstrom has a couple really good questions. I'll let him ask when we have some time at the end. Yeah.
I will. I
Cool.
want to we'll make sure we have time for that. Aurelien, if you would allow me to flip to the topic of Petit Melier. I don't have a bottle pulled from my cellar. Do you have one there near you that you could show the audience? Did he pause himself, Todd?
I think he froze. I think it's a Wi-Fi situation.
Okay.
That's why he couldn't see the videos when we were doing the test. Either that or he's really good at standing still.
Very good. Brian, I may
Yeah.
ask you a question about serving temperature, but I have it here in my notes, but I want to let him come back in
Oh,
and maybe we'll see if we have time for that.
and
I removed the spotlights on him too.
Oh,
So
there he is. He's back.
is he
Okay.
back?
yeah,
All right, here we go.
I did. It was yeah, not moving.
Do you have a bottle of Petit Millier nearby that you can show the group?
Yep, là.
Okay. So maybe we should talk now about how this is beginning to be part of the future strategy for the winery. Can you just tell us some things about that?
So the two important things that we changed at the domain was what you saw, the concrete tanks. I think because talking about this, it's how to keep the freshness in good condition. And I think the concrete, again, in Champagne, we are quite on the north uh, of Europe. You look what's happened in Portugal, Spain, Italy. You see how the winemakers are trying to think about the climate change, the evolution, how they arrive to adapt. They change their variety, also winemaking. And I think the concrete is more and more present to, especially with the reds, to have this kind of freshness and digestibility. We don't have yet some problems in Champagne. I'm not so stressful. Until now, I have to say that climate change is more helpful for us than too extreme. But we are being in a certain way that we have some problems. So that was the first changement. The second part, this is mostly with more Petit Méliès. We have the Petit Méliès from this, Les Sept. Les Sept, this is one plot, which is the field blend. You talk a bit about this, Frank, earlier. Here you have all the 7 grape variety from Champagne. And with the old 4 variety, there is one that we fall in love for the aromatic expression, for the energy, the freshness, the vivacity. Then also for the capacity of resist with the botrytis. Then also for the quality of the low pH, high acidity. So this is the Petit Méliès. Petit Méliès, just to remind.
No. Froze again. There it is. You froze again. There you are.
Sorry. So the Petit Méliès, Gouais Blanc and Savagnin. Savagnin, which is from Jura. Gouais Blanc, this is the mother of the Pinot Noir. Gouais Blanc and Pinot Noir, sorry, makes the Chardonnay. So the Chardonnay and the Petit Méliès is variety created 350 years ago. So not so old variety compared to the Pinot Noir, which is more than 2,000 years ago. Right? So
Right.
old variety, these old variety are quite late cycle of maturity. So I could understand why in the years 50, 70, the people was probably more interested to have Chardonnay because the Chardonnay was easier to grow, was easier also to enjoy in terms of aromatics and delicacy, was easier to produce, and also probably was easier to sell because to sell some champagne with some Petit Méliès or Arban that nobody knows, I think it's maybe better than with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, which are like the noble grapes.
Yes.
So it was a bit of that, and also with the proximity of Burgundy. Burgundy, they have Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, they have more, and so this is why this old 4 variety was going more and more completely lost. Today, we are like maybe 15, 20, 25 growers to have some hopes and some belief with this kind of variety. So it's not the answer, it's one of the answer, I think, for me, to work for the future. If we did, because again, vine growing means long term. We are doing Les Vignes d'Autrefois. Les Vignes d'Autrefois, it's the oldest vines from the domain. It's 100% Pinot Meunier. It was planted by my old grandparents after World War II in 1947. I always say that today, if I'm able to make this Pinot Meunier such qualitative, it's not because I'm just a good winemaker. It's because my old grandparents decide to plant Pinot Meunier on the chalk and with a good selection massal. Then my grandparents and my parents continue to preserve these vines. And after I arrive as the 4th generation to continue to present this kind of wines. So for me, the Petit Méliès, if I decide to plant today, of course, I'm 40. So I have to continue to work in the vines for almost 20, 30 years, and with a lot of pleasure. So I think today is not, it's important to have it, but maybe tomorrow it will be more than important and more than useful. So the question is, the world is full of interrogation. Just talking about climate, we don't know where we are going, but it seems that it's more in this way in terms of warmer temperature, etc. So maybe if the next generation, the 8th generation, take over the domain in 20 years, for example, maybe they will say, it was super good that our father decided in the year 2020 to plant more Petit Mellier. or they could say, we don't know what to do with this fucking Petit Mellier. Why he decided to plant it that so, but it's always it's not a risk, but it's very strong as the concrete. It's two projects very strong and give you a lot of personality and individuality in your project. So this is why today I think the wines from Laherte Frères are quite have a strong personality and easy to recognize in terms of style and the profile that we have. And tomorrow it will be even better. I don't want to be extreme, but I want to follow a direction that I feel is important for me and for the ones that we are making. It's complex, rich, but never fat. Always talking about digestibility and freshness.
And we even talked about this same idea in 2022 when we had our first session, you and I and Todd. We talked about Petit Mellier, and you talked about low pH, better resistance to botrytis, very good aromas, very good freshness. In these 3 years since that time, do you still think those things are true, in fact, more true?
Yeah, that's for sure. But also, I'm already a lot convinced. So when you want to, you make a try, and this is your intention. So you see just what you want to see. So, but for us, for example, last week we had a big tasting with, well, not a big tasting. We have a good tasting with other growers and some journalists. And the idea was to present how the people could adapt as a grower. And I present, for example, a try that we did. One press, Petit Mellier and Chardonnay, 50-50, in 22 vintage. Very warm, more than 12 degrees peak during the harvest. So it was very warm, very rich. But when you taste the juice in terms of freshness, very crispy, very energetic again, you never feel that it's too warm vintage. Also, it was planted on the clay, so the clay brings even more largeness than finesse. So for me, again, I want to be convinced with this kind of experience that I'm not on the wrong way. But I have some friends who are doing other things. I have some friends that prefer to increase the quantity of the lees in order to have maybe a little bit more sugar, but also keeping more acidity and to avoid the risk also of the sunburn. I have some friends who are working with different selection massal. I have some friends, for example, that they prefer to make more wines without malolactic and maybe using a little bit more of sulfite in order to keep a kind of a certain freshness. You have different choice. Today, that's the things. You see how the domain are moving. There is some people that always trying to have a long aging in the barrels or in the cellar. Now, I think there is some people who think to reduce a bit that in order to keep the freshness. There is some judgment, but nobody have the key. I mean,
there's actually coincidentally there's 3 of us on this session, and all 3 of us got a small allocation of the Pinot Noir Petit Mellier that you made.
Yeah,
and that was the first one, yeah.
We did one because it's a just unique edition. We did one of Petit Mellier and Pinot Meunier. It was in 2016, I think. So that was 300 bottles, and the last shipment, it was also just 1 barrel, so 300 bottles. For me, it's a frustration because it's an old variety, but we don't have enough history about it because it's so old and so forgotten. So we have to restart. Chardonnay, we know that, okay, this kind of terroir brings that to Chardonnay. This kind of vinification brings that to the Chardonnay. But with Petit Meslier, we have to work with some friends, Olivier Oriot, Étienne Calsac, Aurelien Lurquin, the Tarlan family, Jean-Baptiste Geoffroy, Agrapar, and a few others who believe that the Petit Meslier could be interesting. And okay, one is doing a Coteau Champenois Blanc, the other one is going to make a blend with other variety, etc., etc. And all together, we try to make the different experimentation and to say, okay, this Petit Meslier have the possibility of creating that, or this is not so well working. And like that, we have more knowledge, more experience, and I think it gives us the better potential to extract the best of the Petit Meslier and to use for the good way. So this is why, in my idea, we make Petit Meslier at 100% because I think it's super interesting. Is using as a spice. Now, in the Ultradition and Blanc de Blanc, you have like almost 2% to 5% of Petit Meslier into the blend, just as a spice.
Have you tasted the Pinot Noir Petit Meslier wine with anybody else other than the family, and what reaction did you get to that?
I have because it's some wines that you couldn't say I don't know. It's yes or no. No, but for sure. I have some, I will not tell you who, but there is a famous wine shop in the region that say, okay, for me, that was the best bottle of the year. So for me, I say, okay, thanks. I have another, it's not a friend, but it's a good grower that I respect a lot and that we are talking. We are not close friends, but he say, oh, no, Aurelien, this kind of wines that I don't understand. For me, the Pinot Noir don't have to be blended with this kind of old variety. That's bullshit. For me, the Pinot Noir, this is not vinified like that. And I understand and I respect also. For me, it's not a question of, it's not by pretension, by ambition. It's just to present and to show, and that like that, there is some people that, okay, I think it makes sense. I want to discover, to develop a little bit more. And that's why, for me, it's important to share.
I appreciate the honesty. Thank you.
No, and I think when you do that, you have to be very humble, but very ambitious in the same time. A lot of humility because you are working with something that you don't know necessarily and that you have to adapt. And this is not the first year that will create the best result. It will be too lucky, I think. But a lot of ambition because you have to think a lot about it, to try to have your reflection probably more complex. For example, making Les Grandes Crayères is quite easy. It's all vines of Chardonnay, very well exposition, the good exposition. It's just pure chalk. When you look the vines, you know that you will create a good wines. That's easy. Yeah. But with the Petit Meslier, yeah, okay, for me, I have a lot of hopes, but this is not with some hopes that you create something super complex and qualitative. Maybe in your idea. But for me, it's working and working and working. So now the first plantation was by 10 years ago. Now we are with 1 hectare of Petit Meslier. We are probably the biggest grower who have this amount of Petit Meslier in Champagne. Again, it's not by competition, but it's really because I have a lot of hopes with that. Half of my friends say that we are crazy, and the other part say that we are a genius. So you make a mix and you are near the truth. No,
but it's yes or no. There's no middle.
For me, this is, and this is why I say that. But sometimes I feel the Chardonnay could be a little bit boring. You know, with Chardonnay, with the climate change, I'm sure that you already, not necessarily Champagne, but the Chardonnay all over the world is, you have some Chardonnay everywhere. On the sandy soil, it's...
We lost him again.
You have always the sensation that the Chardonnay, it's super nice, but this is not the one that I will drink all during my life or during the dinner. So sometimes in Champagne, the Blanc de Blanc, yes, for sure. When you have very strong terroir, very strong personality of vinification. This is a super interesting variety. But I think in Champagne, we don't, not everybody have super excellent terroir as Ménil-sur-Roger or Avize. Nobody have the capacity to vinify all the Chardonnay with high level of maturity and vinification in barrels. So there is, for me, I feel some Chardonnay which are quite classical. And for that, I don't like the classical way. For me, I like the personality, for me, the personality is really the key to show what you have, what you want to present in your wines. So this is why I think Petit Meslier, it's something from her DNA in Champagne, and I think it will be maybe a mistake to not using more. But this is really personal. Of course, you will never see some Petit Meslier in the blend of Ruinart, for example. I don't think so. But
what?
There will be no Petit Meslier in the blend of Ruinart Blanc de Blanc.
Oh, Ruinart.
I don't think that makes sense. They are working in a different style of Chardonnay, etc. So you imagine well, it's not the opposite, but it's different approach.
So let me ask one final question on this topic, and then we will get to question and answer, so we can respect the time.
Yeah.
We have the big three, the noble grapes. So we have Noir, Chardonnay, Meunier. Now we've talked about Petit Meslier. There's three others that are still there, Arbonne and the Fromenteau, etc. Do you see those as potentially in your future, or do they not fit at the moment as single varietal?
There is a future for everything. The problem is that the life is too short to do all the things that you want to do. No, but for sure. For me, the time that we say, okay, the Petit Meslier is what we like, the time that we decide to do the plantation, the time that we make the first bottle on the market, it's already 10 years. So for me, again, you have to find your project, to be selective, not making all the things that you are thinking that you have in your mind. If not, you will be completely lost. So for us, we already took this direction. Then I think like the field blend, it's a super interesting. For me, the next plantation, I would like to go more in the field blend. So of course, Arbane, Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, they are interesting, but in my mind, at the domain, personally, I don't feel a lot of interest to have one plot only of Arbane or Pinot Blanc. But into a blend, into one plot of Pinot Meunier, for example, 5%, I'm okay.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I feel like I'm ready to go run a race. That was a great conversation.
No, but I think it's difficult to explain what we think about that and what are our ideas behind. But I try to explain in this way that long term, you have to take some decision, not just because it's unique, it will give you a better visibility. It's really because I feel that the concrete tanks will help us to keep the freshness and the fruit. I think also that the Petit Meslier will help us for the future with freshness, acidity. But voilà, it's you have to be convinced a lot for that.
Todd, as we transition to Q&A, what I'm reminded about here as I've listened to Aurelien for the last hour is we talked about humility with Thomas Champ of Vilmar. And I see with Aurelien, I see with you humility kind of blended with intention and a spirit to keep trying, experiment. That's admirable. I respect that. And it's not about the pursuit of ego or image, but it's doing the right things and trying to break through into something that's different because you want to try.
And I think this is the education we received. I think we are farmers. Our feet have to stay on the ground. It's really important. It's always I repeat, but this kind of long-term reflection and long-term working, that gives you another dimension of the time and your works in your life. I don't know if I explain well what I'm thinking, but for me, okay, maybe at this moment we could be recognized as, for example, Vilmar and the other friends like Beres, Charton, etc. We could be recognized as a very good growers. But for me, I will never forget that my grandparents was working so hard the last 70 years, etc. And we don't know how the future of the wine production will be. But it's when you look the difference between 70 years old before and today, it's quite impressive. So I think today we are our generation. We are to say that we are super lucky because there is some people like you ready to take time to understand what we are doing, ready to pay a little bit more because there is some value in the wines and some very strong energy and passion inside of the bottles. And also that the climate is not so, well, sometimes is not so friendly with us, but is not so hard than in the years on the beginning of the 20th century. And now that we have also the health of the technology. So I think just talking as to be a wine grower today in Champagne, we are super lucky. So I don't know if it's continue for a very long time, but for me, this is why I always say, stay humble, but always very ambitious. It is not contradictory.
Beautiful. Quote of the day.
All right,
Todd,
Frank.
let's get some questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask Brian Grafstrom to unmute.
Okay.
You got it, Brian?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Well, good evening, Aurelien. Thank you so much for joining us. I count myself amongst the group here as a huge fan of your wines. In that context, I was pretty surprised to hear about all the reserve wines going into the Blanc de Blanc Brut nature. How far back do those reserve wines go?
But you know that the reserve was created quite a long time ago in Champagne because that was the problem that there was some harvest with high yield and the harvest just after there was mostly nothing because it was destroyed by the frost or the hail or other things. So it was that's something the reserve wines. That's something again. It's very unique in France and just in Champagne. So for that also we are quite lucky. My father always think that the reserve it's our treasury and that we have to keep and to preserve it and in the best way as possible. So you know that Laherte Frères, we are négociant manipulant. It means that we are buying the grapes from the family and we could also buy some grapes from other friends who are working in the same way than us. When we have some problems of low yield, like in 24 or in 21, the idea is not to use too much of a reserve because maybe it could be interesting for this bottling, but the years after, maybe you don't have enough quantity of reserve. So the idea is to try to find some friends who have the capacity to sell to us some grapes. Like that, we are not taking from a reserve and we are using the same volumes. So it's a little bit of impact of the cash flow that we have to find. But at the end, in terms of quality, it's really important. So for me, Blanc Blanc Nature, one of the key for sure, 50% of reserve. And I don't have it's a project that I have, but I want to extend this proportion. Now with the concrete tanks, because for example, the Blanc Blanc, now it's base 21 with 50% reserve. So it's 20 and 19, the last two harvests. With the concrete tanks that we have more capacity, now the idea is to start perpetual reserve for Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier, Pinot Noir. So it means that in 5 years, in the Blanc de Blanc, it will be harvest 27 with reserve from 26, 5, 4, 22. 1. So it will take time, but it will arrive. And I think you have in Champagne free time of aging. The aging that you know well, aging on the lees between the bottling and the disgorgement. This is important, but it's more the texture, giving the oxido-reduction structure. Then you have the aging of post-disgorgement period. I think for us, this is something that we are doing well. All the wines are leaving the domain not before 1 year to 6 months to 12 months after disgorgement. I think you already have this experience of having a wines too recently disgorged. That's not something super nice. So that's quite important. And the first part of the time of aging is the vinification and the reserve. And now the reserve, I think we will have this capacity with the new concrete tanks place to have more possibility. So again, the perpetual reserve, I don't know. I don't arrive to imagine how could be the blend in the future for Ultradition and Blanc de Blanc. But for me, I'm sure that in the next 5 years, this kind of wines, the gap of quality could increase quite easily because of the perpetual, because of the concrete that you preserve more the freshness and the identity, and maybe also because of the Petit Melier spice.
Sounds like Vilmar, they're holding their wines 18, 24 months post-disgorgement before they send them to market.
And for me, this is why they are the wines are so good from Laurent. It's this is the power of the history and the generation. The grandparents was doing that. He continued. He didn't say, okay, more business, etc. And they have this notion of time, which is super excellent. After you have other growers that they're saying, okay, for us the most important aging on the lees. After we disgorge, we ship the wines, and the wines are great. Again, there is not one recipe, but for me, I more agree like you that the time always helps after disgorgement.
Yeah, I'm beginning to appreciate that idea now. Brian, do you have another question? Oh, Todd, you want to unmute him?
Yeah, there's one more that was sent as a direct message. Well, I'll ask him to unmute first. And then there's one more question, which is kind of a more general one if you want to hit that first. Approximately how many cases of each wine do you make, Aurelien?
In total, this is like almost 200,000 bottles a year in total. The idea also, because you know that we don't sell necessarily all vintages. And in my project, the idea, if we are producing 200,000 bottles, we sell 180. It means that every year since 2018, we are putting in the cellar 20,000 bottles more for the aging on the all different cuvées, Ultradition, Les Crayères, etc. And then to be more specific with the Lieu-dit, Les Crayères, this is approximately 3,000 bottles a year. Wow. Nature de Trait is 4,000 bottles. The Blanc de Blanc is like 50,000 bottles a year.
Wow. Okay.
How many bottles of La Prairie of those 3,000 do Frank and his crew buy? And Astrid and
hey, I still have some 2014 in the cellar. This is not 2014, this is 19, but I got 14, I'm saving it.
Okay, Brian, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Thanks, Todd. Aurelien, earlier you were talking about your choice to not vintage designate the Cray. And if I heard you correctly, yes, and I have a bottle of the May 2023 disgorgement open right now that I've been enjoying, and my gosh, it's drinking quite well. I would say it's even a bit more open than the last time I had it. If I recall correctly, you said the idea with this bottling is to focus on the grape, the Chardonnay, as opposed to the vintage. I know Frank often enjoys putting together tastings that include some comparing and contrast with various bottlings, because when we compare and contrast, that helps illuminate certain differences or similarities. With that in mind, is there a particular bottling or two within your range that you would recommend drinking alongside the Cray? And if so, which ones and why?
What you mean by drinking alongside?
At the same time.
After it's because for me, you have always for the wine in general, you have always when you could drink the wines and to enjoy it. And sometimes you don't have to think too much about these numbers. So this is why sometimes I think Nature de Crais is the one that I don't also, it's vinified without sulfites, and I don't want to put no sulfites on the labels. I mean, you always know this kind of people who are just looking for organic and low sulfate wine. That's something I don't want. I mean, Nature de Crais, I want that the people drink it because it's good, not because it's organic or no sulfate. And this is the same for the vintage. There is some vintage that, oh, okay, this is 19, it's amazing. Oh, I don't want to buy the 21, it's too, the journalists say that it's too minerals or I don't know what.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, we have to take some decision. After, I think with people like you with a lot of knowledge and want to have a lot of details regarding what it's really inside of the bottles, okay, maybe on the back we could put the codes for the base, etc. But again, for me, the footprint for a wine is first, not necessarily first, but the most important is the variety, the terroir, and then the vintage. After, there is some wines that I thinking that, especially Nature de Crais, is more important to have how we do the vinification without sulfite, how we decide to select these plots. It's really because we believe that it's giving a personality of the Chardonnay from Côte des Blancs, and this is what we want to show. Not necessarily to show how is the Chardonnay from 22 in this wine. Huh? And then also, I'm not. I don't know if I'm. I think I'm not super good in as a marketing guy or for selling. But the idea is that a range is quite large. So the Chardonnay today we have the Blanc Blanc Nature, we have Nature de Crais, and we have Les Grandes Crayères. Then it will be a new wine, a new Blanc de Blanc.
When? What is that from?
The first you have if you look again one of the movie you will have you will find the answer.
Okay.
Gotta play that again.
It's from a very interesting terroir, and the idea is that we want to do the same than Les Rouges Maisons. It means it will be a long aging in barrels, 20 months aging in barrels. It's a Cramant. This is buying grapes from a good friend. It's the first year, so 24 harvest. One press, 3,000 kilos. We have 7 barrels, and it's too early to know, but we feel that the potential of this terroir could match to have long aging in barrels. So that will bring another dimension also of the Chardonnay. And that will be declared as a vintage, because I think that this dimension, as for you, Les Rouges Maisons 20, it's quite important to know it. But for Nature de Crais and for the non-vintage, this is, well, for the non-vintage, normally it's not so interesting to know each time the base.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before, Brian, but you do when you get some of the technical or that fixed detail away from the presentation, then the person just has to say, well, what's there?
Right, because at the end of the day, it's what's in the glass that counts, right?
Right.
Last time I checked, I don't know what numbers taste like.
Yeah, that's right. Todd, any other questions?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. No more questions. Let's see. Oh, wait. One more. Could you comment on the vintages from 2016 forward?
Speed round.
What you mean?
Like, what are
you
your
talk
thoughts?
about the
What are your
vintages
thoughts
beginning
on?
in 2016?
Yeah, your thoughts on the
so
vintages that are forthcoming into the market 2016 and forward. Do you have any insight for us? What to expect?
The 2016.
2016.
So just talk about, maybe just make a comment, maybe a brief comment about 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, just for contrast.
For me, the vintage, I remember very well about the vine growing. And for me, it's always, when I talk about the vintage, it's not necessarily the profile of the wine, but how the profile of the season was. And just like 16, very cold, fresh, a lot of mildew, really hard to work. At the end, late harvest, so it's a bit austere, but super complex, super details, super precise. 17, easy vine growing, but a lot of rain arriving before the harvest. So a lot of botrytis, rich, powerful, a little bit of the glycerol materials, sometimes a little too large, but very energetic. So very interesting vintage, but not for all the growers. 18 is like super easy in vine growing and winemaking, and even with quite good volumes. Everywhere in Europe, it was like more or less 25% more grapes than normal. I'd say that it's a sexy vintage. It's rich, open, generous, very charming. But sometimes when it's too charming, maybe you lose a little bit of delicacy. So that's not my preference in terms of vintage. But hopefully, the works that we did, grower like us, in the vines, that permit to have this kind of personality and freshness. So there is some 18 from like the Burgundy, I remember. The reds was just cherry fruit and nothing else in terms of finesse and digestibility. 19, but in fact, during the tasting, I was tasting the Empreinte 19. This is what arrived on the market before next year. We disgorged last December, and that was the first bottle that we opened with a journalist this week. 19, that was the first time that we had the sunburn. On the 10th of July, 43 degrees Celsius, and we had a lot of the grapes. We never saw that. The grapes was on the west exposition. The grapes completely burned because of too much dryness and hot temperature. So the grapes was not looking well, nice at all on the press. But in terms of quality, a lot of concentration, and even more also a lot of acidity and energy. So for sure, one of the very, very interesting vintage to keep and to drink also. 20, very well balanced. It's the good kids, everything well in place. I think the problem with 20 is that it was the COVID moment. And there was some people in Champagne thinking that it's the end of the world and nobody will drink Champagne anymore. So they try to reduce the cost production, and they don't make smart decision in terms of timing of picking, etc. We had during this harvest a big difference between phenolic maturity and technologic maturity. The technologic maturity is how much sugar you have in the grapes, in the juice. And the phenolic maturity is how which kind of flavors do you have. So for me, of course, we need to have a minimum of sugar in the grapes, but also we need to have the flavors in place. And the Chardonnay was really taking a lot of time in the 20. So for us, it was the longest harvest that we did, more than 22 days. Then 21, until now, 21 was the most difficult vintage, the season that we had, because in terms of rain, it was 300 millimeters of rain just in the month of June. So a lot of mildew. So the grapes was difficult to create. But at the end, it's a personality that I really love. For me, it will be a vintage, super fine and elegant, very precise, a bit like 13. 13, when it was arriving on the market, people say, oh, no, it's too fresh, it's not enough rich and body with too much largeness. Today, there was some people say, oh, this is one of the best fine and elegant vintage. Maybe it takes time for 21. 22, super open, generous, rich in alcohol, rich in flavors, but also it's different than 18. I think I prefer 22 because you have the concentration, but also you have the contrast also working well, I think, with the freshness from the terroir, but it's a year of grower. I mean, it's all the works you did in the vines, that's the very positive answer with this kind of vintage. 23, easy season, but everything was doing super easily during the vine growing. But 1 month before the harvest, rain. On the beginning, we were quite happy because it was giving us more grapes, more volumes, but it was too much volumes. Like normally the grapes, it's 130 grams in average for one grapes. The record was in 2005 that it was 180 grams. And in 23, it was more than 220 grams. So you imagine that there was some dilution. So for us, it was a lot of something not really common, and we have to really take some risk in terms of waiting, of making also a lot of selection. The sorting in the vines was very, very important. So for me, one of the very difficult vintage. We'll see. It's early to know. It's too early to know because 23, it's still even for the non-vintage, it's not yet on the market. For the vintage, we have a lot to wait. I don't know how it will develop. Yeah. And 24, again, it's early, but 21 was the more difficult vintage season, but now 24 for sure is on the top. We had mostly 1 year of rain. From February to October 24, it was rain all the time. So super hard, super difficult for us. And I imagine for the vines the same. But at the end, the quality of and the personality inside of the 24, they will be not high in volumes, but in terms of concentration, it's super interesting. 24 is probably for me a mix between 12, 13, and 16.
Oh,
Wow.
okay.
I don't know if you like this kind of vintage, but
I
for
love
me,
those vintages.
voilà. So for me, it's the same.
That,
So that's
that vintage summary is gold. I'm gonna create a separate shorter video of just Aurelien's overview of the vintages 16 forward. That's an amazing nugget right there. That's great video.
It's
That's
an
perfect.
overview about growing and as a grower, not because you ask that for an oenologist, a chef de cave, he have a completely different because he will talk about the low acidity or how it was for the Pinot Noir are better than the Chardonnay, etc. For me, because each each domain is really unique, and I think the main goal it's the things that you are not taking in that you are not able to control is the weather. And I think this is what makes the vintage. For example, 24, what saves the vintage? It's like 2 weeks before the beginning of the harvest. It was on the beginning of September. We had 4 degrees Celsius on the morning and 15 degrees on the afternoon. This contrast between the cold temperature and the higher temperature in the afternoon, just that I think this is that will create really the quality and the complexity of the flavors. Yeah. But this is really personal.
That's fantastic.
That vintage linear thinking there was just gold. That was gold, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, you make that a separate video, Todd. That's
I'm going to. I'm going to have
great
both
idea.
for 100%. It's great. I was just drooling while he was talking about it. So we're right at time now, so we should wrap it up so he can actually go to bed. He's got to get up early. He's a farmer, remember?
I remember. I remember. Aurelien, in closing, on behalf of our community and from Todd and I, we want to thank you for making time on your weekend Saturday evening to talk with us. I do very much enjoy your wines, and Todd is right. I have a lot of them. It's because I like them. And when I want to open up something that's fresh and pure, I've got contrast here. I've got different styles. I've got different sites, different cepage. So it's kind of just like making what part of the painting do I want to see tonight? And then I go get that bottle from what you've created. So thank you for that on behalf of the group here that's joined us today. And again, thank you very much for giving us your time.
Yeah, thanks everybody. No, that's a pleasure. And again, I think as a farmer, as a wine grower, the most important is still to produce some grapes to work well the land, to try to create something good inside of the bottles. We are not medicine. We don't save life, but we give pleasure to the people. And I think one of the good things also in our work is that the wine need to be shared. We bring to you some bottles through our importers, etc. But I think also to have this kind of moment of discussion, I think it's very important. But for me, I feel very super happy and proud that people have some interest to to say, okay, we want to know a little bit more of what you are doing. And I hope that you will have a better view about not just Laherte Frères, just our domain, but also the idea that the champagne growers movement, it's something that you will have even more question in the future, I'm quite sure. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Good evening. Cheers.
A pleasure. Enjoy
Aurelien.
your day. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Bye.
Bye.